Feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym, My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 63. This is M.A.Y.A coming off hiatus. I've actually been gone for 2 months, left you hanging with episode 62, but I'm like, there's no way I can possibly go through May being Mental Health Awareness Month, and last month in April was Counseling Awareness Month, and not do an episode. I said, I got to get back on track. Yes, I've been busy doing many things related specifically to mental health, but this is my passion, and sharing with people is something that I love to do. So I was like, I got to get back on track. I got to get things going. Hello, Chris Cole. Welcome to the show. Hope you are doing well. So I figured what better month to come back, May, and do the show, because there's plenty to talk about. And though mental wellness, mental health should be at the top of everyone's mind, I feel like it's front and center for many of the wrong reasons. And today is the day I felt, let's begin to normalize the conversation, which I've been trying to do. I've been doing this podcast for more than a year, and other versions of itself, the M.A.Y.A show. And I feel like because it's not sexy or interesting, people just don't want to talk about it. But the minute that mental health pops up in conversation in regards to recent events and the historical events, it becomes front and center. It should be front and center, and it shouldn't take conflict, controversy, or loss of lives for us to understand how important that mental wellness really is. So I am back to doing the thing that I love, but also helping to educate, inform, and hopefully you will join me in normalizing the conversation by sharing this podcast, talking about mental health, asking people if they're okay, all that good stuff. So as I begin all the time, namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode. This is 63 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. I feel that my podcast it looks to embrace salient topics that are related to mental wellness from a fresh and forward-thinking perspective. There's lots of conversations, and it's a thread that goes through so many stories that you see every day. It doesn't scream mental wellness or mental health at you, but it's always at the core foundation of most things that you're seeing. So I like to put perspective on things about mental health and mental wellness so people can begin to truly understand it. So the focus of my podcast is to help you pull back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage, to be honest, that plagues so many of us, at least at some point in our lives. And to help you, if you haven't already done it, identify the ambitions and harness the motivation to help you use satisfaction and access happiness in everyday life, not grandiosity. I hate when people have lofty long-term goals and they're not present in the moment. And what I try to do with my podcast is to help people get front and center and start living every day to its fullest and seeing the value in it. So if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome. I just say buckle up for safety because occasionally it can be an unexpected bumpy ride. I may say something that jars a memory for you, an experience that you really hadn't processed or thought about. And that's what it is here. We know we do have to get uncomfortable to get to the place we're trying to get to. I tell people that in therapy all the time. We all have to get a little uncomfortable and have some conversations that you may not want to have, but they're important if we're trying to move forward and have progress and change the trajectory of your happiness, or tackle or address your depression or anxiety or whatever it is, your post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever it is you're managing. We got to get uncomfortable to be able to really process it. So I always say, if you're a first-time listener or viewer, I may say something that can make you a little uncomfortable. If it does, it's worth writing down. With that being said, if you're a returning listener or viewer, welcome back. You already know and you're familiar with how I do things here, how we get down. Rule number 1 with a podcast is you work at your own pace. There is now going to be 63 episodes. So by now, you had enough time to catch up while M.A.Y.A was on her hiatus. But I always encourage people to go back to episode 1 and kind of journey through the podcast, because I think I give you nuggets of different things that can really be helpful. And even if it's not for you, it could help someone in your life that's struggling with something. You may say, I was listening to this podcast and I thought about so-and-so. This might be worthy of sharing. So jot down if I say something that makes you think, but remember, you're always working at your own pace. Whatever episode you're at, that's fine. So with that being said, the next 60 minutes is all about you. So Get comfortable. You might get a little uncomfortable. Find a place that you can, if it's quiet, you might still be at work, so maybe you can't do it. You might be listening to this after it's not live, whatever the case is. Grab your beverage of choice. I'm going to be double fisted today. I'm doing some coffee along with some hydration. I'm doing some water as well, tea. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So you may have a glass of wine, whatever it is that's going to help you feel comfortable and dedicate these next 60 minutes to you. So we got to do a couple housekeeping things. Remember, especially if you are a first-time listener and viewer, you can join the conversation. So whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, all you have to do is actually type in the comment section, and then I can share it with the other viewers watching the show. So for instance, Leanne Warner, hello. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about dysfunctional families. Oh, I've tackled conversations about family, but I'm always willing to go back and rehash the conversations and allow people. Leanne is actually an author. So, I'm sure you've got great insight as being a writer, how you put things together. Welcome, Monica Savage. Welcome to the show. Thank you. I appreciate you are equally as wonderful. You are missed. So with that being said, just like they shared a comment, you type in the comment section and I can share it with people listening to the show as well. Now, if you're saying there's 63 episodes, including this one, well, where do I find these episodes? Well, you can always listen to episodes of My Ambition, Your Ambition. You can find them on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeartRadio. I'm now on Amazon Audibles, Spotify. Pretty much, if it's a podcast platform, you can find me there. Just search M.A.Y.A. M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. So you can always find me on one of those podcast platforms. I would also tell you the easy way to do it is just to go to my website, MA.com, and voila, all of the episodes are there. Something you also should know, with all of my episodes, I give podcast companions. So, which means I'm going to talk about a topic, but give you some supplemental things that you can go back and read and research. In fact, I have a couple worksheets I'm going to add to the website, some articles for you to read to kind of give the conversation a bit more depth and breadth, because this is not an easy topic and it's not a one size fits all topic. But I figure if we can start the conversation with creating understanding about what mental wellness is versus mental health versus mental illness, it might help people to begin to really be able to engage in the conversation. And of course, lastly, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel to search M.A.Y.A. What's going to happen is you're going to put M.A.Y.A. in, and then all this Japanese anime is going to pop up, and just scroll down a little bit further and boom, there's my face. Like, subscribe, and share. I always like when people share. Sharing is good. So those are ways you can get connected to the show, as well as if you happen to be a social media person. Hopefully you are following me by now. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai, and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents, are all the ways that you can get social with the show at any point of time. I don't tend to overpost things. I may post a story here and there that I think is worthy of conversation, but I don't try to put too much on things because I don't like to overwhelm people. I put it if it's worthy and I think it's something that people could really use to help them in their mental wellness journey. With that being said, the purpose also of my podcast is to help you to create a toolbox, which means I want to give you things, not just talk about mental wellness and, kind of give you these great information and lofty ideas. I want to give you practical things that you can begin to do in your life to strike that balance. That's what mental wellness is about. We'll jump into that in a bit. So I like to give you tools. So I could say, it's the toolbox. But one thing we always do on the show, and I always encourage people, is that you have to open up your toolbox, and the first thing that you take out, and right now we got a lot of things in our toolbox if you're a returning listener or viewer, but the one most important thing we always take out is our emotional intelligence. It will be the thing that will separate you from others in your life. When you get clarity and you understand your emotions and you can understand others, the way you begin to interact with them, the choices that you make change drastically when your EI increases. So if you don't know, emotional intelligence, in a really short, quick way, is pretty much, we refer to that as your ability to evaluate, perceive, and control emotions, not just your own, but that are others. Perspective is everything. We always say you got to take out, your perspective in the toolbox too, because often in situations that can be engaging, you may not always have the right perspective. Remember, there's three sides to the coin: heads, tails, and that what makes it three-dimensional, the sides. And sometimes what you may think and what you may feel may not exactly be on point. The good thing about as you raise your emotional intelligence, you don't become afraid to understand when you're right and when you're wrong and being able to express yourself. So every show, front and center, you always put out your EI. It's so important. Monica Savage just shared. So often addiction and mental illness go hand in hand. Yes, we're going to talk about that a bit. Cannot confront one without confronting the other with equal energy. Absolutely. This is why within mental health, we do look at things as being dual diagnosis. We often know that things can be comorbid, meaning often when there is substance abuse, there tends to be depression, anxiety, PTSD. We know this, schizophrenia. We do realize that substance abuse often goes hand in hand because often people will self medicate. Some people begin with substance abuse being the primary thing and develop mental health issues along the way because of addiction. So it's a really interesting dynamic how these two things are intertwined, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So you opened up your toolbox, you took out your EI, and I've kind of carried this saying into 2022. It was a saying for 2021. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Said many, many thousands of years ago by Aristotle. The Enlightenment is there. You cannot hope to understand others and to even facilitate healthier relationships if you have not invested the time in understanding yourself. And it's interesting how people will say things like, I'm going to focus on this person, though they're suffering emotionally, mentally, financially, not taking care of themselves, but yet they think they can do better for someone else. What you will find is when you invest the time and the energy in you, the rest of your life will fall in line. It permeates. Because when you understand who you are, you understand what works, what doesn't work, what you accept, what you will stand for. There's so many things and why it's worth investing in self. It's probably one of the biggest investments you can ever make, and you can't put a dollar amount on it. All right. If I happen to say something, or Leanne threw out a topic about dysfunctional families, and if you have an idea for a show, or I say something and you're like, hey, Maya, I got a question about this, you can always drop me a line in the Maya virtual mailbag. I will go ahead and kind of look at what you're asking. And what I've done recently is I'll get several letters from people. And I'll say, you know something, this is something that's really worthy of a show. Picking out 3 or 4 letters that people have sent to me, and I put together one episode just to address all of the letters, kind of like a Dear Abby thing, so to speak. So if you have an idea for a show, or I say something and you have a question, feel free to go ahead and drop me a virtual letter, aka an email, with your thoughts or questions. Just send it to getinspired@mayakai.com. Again, to shoot me a virtual letter, aka an email, to getinspired@mayakai.com. And either I'll address it one-on-one, or it just might end up being an entire show, because I've gotten some good letters that made a great episode just standing on their own. All right, let's jump into episode 63. Let's talk mental wellness and health. Sometimes you hear health and wellness. You know, if you take off the word mental, you frequently hear conversations about health and wellness, and it focuses more about your physical well-being, which people are usually very on board about. We have lots of initiatives and foundations that focus on health and wellness. Well, the difference in this conversation is all we're doing is putting the word mental in front of it, which, to be honest, is one of the most important initiatives that should exist on the table with every organization. I feel that every employer should have resources for mental health and wellness. I feel schools need to rethink the way they approach mental health and wellness. It should be everywhere. It should be normalized, because if we can put the time and we can put the effort into our physical health, ask yourself a question: why do we so frequently neglect our mental health? Mental wellness, aka health, is the engine that drives your daily life. Think about that. This drives all of this. From the moment you wake up, even when you are asleep, your mind is working. It's processing your day, maybe the week still. It may be processing the month, or it may be processing things that have happened years ago. Hell, your mind is processing your life ongoing, putting things in perspective. Mental wellness is where your thoughts and emotions are created, then manifest into behaviors and actions that affect you, obviously emotionally and mentally, but then financially, spiritually, socially, professionally. Your mental health, mental wellness affects every domain in your life, but yet we give it so little of importance until it falls into shambles. And then we wonder why we're just a heaping mess, a hot mess, so to speak, because we didn't invest the time in something that is an engine that makes you run. The essence of the meaning is in every aspect of your life. It influences, impact everything that you do. So in this episode, we're going to talk about mental wellness and health. We'll put a very powerful and essential tool, this up here, an asset. And sometimes it becomes a liability, into perspective. And hopefully once we do that, we will be able to then really put mental health and wellness and illness, because they're three different things, very closely related, but there's still differences. Maybe if people begin to understand it, it won't be such a taboo. So, with that being said, I'm always very literal about things. I think frameworks and understanding of what something is a large part of the conversation. So I'm going to break it all down, because often we think that mental health and wellness are synonymous, and they are, but they're not. They have a lot of shared, I guess you could say, characteristics, but they functionality in something I call your mental ecosystem is different. So specifically, I didn't rewrite this. It was great when I read it. I said, I'm going to take it for the worst. So mental wellness, by definition on globalwellnessinstitute.org. By the way, anytime I put a website, it means it's worthy of checking out. It's got some good stuff on it. So right by its meaning, it says mental wellness is the internal resource that helps us think, feel, connect, and function. It is an active process that helps us to build resilience, growth, and flourish. I will add to that. Failure to find mental balance through wellness often then turns into depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. So, straightforward. This is mental wellness. Now, let's talk about what is mental health. Like I said, they're often looked at to be synonymous, but there's some difference. Yes, mental health also includes that emotional, psychological, and social well-being aspects of it, but it also affects how we think, feel, and act. So it's more of the state that you're in. So if you're imbalanced, then your mental health will also be imbalanced. So think of it as in terms of it's your mental state. It's how you then handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So understanding mental wellness is how you try to strike a balance to have a good mental state. So this is how they're similar, yet they're different. Now, we can't talk about mental wellness and mental health without talking about specifically, well, then what happens when you're imbalanced and your mental state is not good when you're imbalanced? Then this is where potentially mental illness steps in. Again, mental illness, pulling this directly from a website I use, it's mental illness is specifically something that can be diagnosed. It is considered to be a health condition. Hence, this is why insurance covers it. It's not a figment of your imagination. It involves changes in your emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of all three. And it's associated with often distress, and it creates problems in functioning socially, at work, with your family. You just can't do the activities that you might have would have done before. So it's looked at as a medical condition that's diagnosable. It's no different than something like diabetes or heart disease. But yet, because it refers to your mental state, we tend to stigmatize it. And that's the part that's sad. So when your mental health is not balanced, this is where mental illness comes in. That's diagnosable. Then it becomes treatable, whether it be through therapy, medication, whatever the case may be. But it is now something that has to be treated because your imbalance is impairing your life. So I felt there was no way we could talk about mental health and wellness without obviously adding the conversation about, what happens when you're imbalanced? It turns into mental illness. Now, I like to believe that language means anything, a lot in conversations. And Monica Savage, you just said something I think is important when we talk about normalizing the conversation and stop stigmatizing it, which we'll talk about a bit later in the episode. Yes, take the shame component out of mental illness. This is why so many people refrain, run away from even wanting to address their mental health issues because of how it's stigmatized. There must be something wrong with you because of this. But yet when you have diabetes, heart disease, whatever the case may be, no one says there must be something wrong with you because you have diabetes. But when it comes to mental health, instantly people become throw labels and things of that nature. So, yes, part of being able to normalize this conversation about mental health is removing the shame component from the illness itself. I like to refer to saying having mental health issues opposed to saying mental illness, because it's your mental health, your mental state is imbalanced. Hence, it has now created an issue for you. I do believe language is so important if we're trying to normalize a conversation about mental health within communities. So, who is affected by mental illness? Who has mental health issues? Here's something that when I share something on screen as a ticker, it means it's worthy and I want it to stick with you. I'm saying it, but I also want you to read it. Mental illness is all around us, whether we see it or not. Mental illness will indirectly affect all and every single one of us at some point of our lives. And I don't think people realize that. Everybody is affected at some point by mental illness, whether it is us or someone we know, close, or maybe a distant kind of contact with someone. We all have seen mental health issues in process. Here's what's interesting about mental health. For something to be so stigmatized and not given front and center attention until something happens, like what just happened in Uvalde, Texas, what happened in obviously Buffalo, New York, several weeks ago, what happened on the subway in New York. Oh, then we go back. And by the way, what happened in Uvalde, Texas has now become the worst school shooting in a decade behind Sandy Hook. So now the stakes are getting higher, and yet we're still not having the conversation about what's wrong. And so far, what we know about almost every single of the incidents and sadness that I mentioned is that the conversation about mental health has entered every single one of those situations that have resulted in loss of life or injury to others. But the reason we have to be okay with talking about mental health is because think about these stats. 1 in 5 people within 2022 will experience a mental health or addiction problem. 1 in 5. Someone might say, well, that doesn't seem like a really awful number, but 1 in 5 to me is high. Now, let's pull that apart even more. 1 in 3, now notice how the number goes down. People will experience a mental health issue in their lifetime. 1 in 3. 38% of people, now mind you, this is some data that was pulled back in about 2018. So I'll be honest, I feel these numbers have probably gone up ever since COVID happened, because it really did reintroduce mental health issues with people who maybe weren't struggling with them, with depression and anxiety. So this data probably isn't not accurate, but I wanted to share at least where the number was, at least in 2018. And we know it's probably larger, but 38% of people, think about this, will experience a mental health issue or crisis before the age of 15. Before the age of 15. Think about that. 50% of people will have experienced some mental health issue by the age of 40. Hence, this is probably where we can know that ideas like the midlife crisis comes in. 14% of people, interesting enough, only 14% of people at that time were seeking mental health services. Think about the numbers, how high they are, but what small percent of people who actually seek help on their own. 30% of people who seek help tend to be female, because we stigmatize and make men feel that they have to be strong. Big boys don't cry, suck it up and deal with it. On the flip side, if we were talking about rates of suicide, men have higher completion rates than females do. Mental illness strikes in different ways, but one thing we do know, and Monica Savage spoke about it earlier in her comments, you too can get involved in the conversation with the show. Just type a comment on Facebook or YouTube, and I can share it on the screen. One of the leading causes with mental health issues is substance abuse. At one point, 40% was a leading cause. But we often know that, like I mentioned earlier, that mental health issues is comorbid with substance abuse. So 40% of people usually who have mental health issues also have a substance abuse issue. 24% of them often struggle with depression, 13% often anxiety. Honestly, depression and anxiety is comboed together is even higher. Often there are issues with eating disorders. Bipolar disorder has risen exponentially in the last several years, the diagnosis. And though we do see psychosis often in schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorders, it's the smaller percent of what actually is the larger issues within mental health. So you often think at one point schizophrenia was a leading thought for most people with mental health issues. What people don't realize is that psychotic disorders are the smaller issue, and there's more issues more on the side with substance abuse, bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety are larger pieces of the puzzle right now. Now, mind you, there's other things like borderline personality disorder, PTSD. I've seen the numbers rise exponentially in the last 5 years. Now, mind you, we can only go by the data that we get to kind of be able to share, but the data is telling us that we are trending and we're seeing more depression and we're seeing more anxiety. And I guarantee you, once we really get the studies about COVID back, the numbers are going to jump exponentially. Probably when we start crunching all this data going into probably like 2024 is when I feel like we'll have a good snapshot of how much depression, anxiety, and PTSD rose during the COVID pandemic. So, it's always so important to understand that mental illness is always around us. Even if we don't see it, it affects someone we know. Let's have a real talk time moment. This is something I always do in my episodes. Real talk times within the episodes are really about saying, let's put it in perspective. Let's make it personal. Let's talk about you. Because so many of us really never want to admit when we're struggling with depression. Especially if we don't like to ask for help, if we've kind of created this image of ourselves as being strong, unbreakable. So many people suffer in silence because they're afraid to ask for help, partially because people believe them to be just a rock, stoic. They are the support for others. Even people who are the support for others need support as well. So if someone has been supporting you, I hope you've never lost sight of the fact that they have helped you. And if they didn't seem like they were themselves, they were struggling, I hope you reached back out and offered that same helping hand that they offered to you. So what's interesting is that so many times we ourselves have dealt with depression, but didn't do anything about it. We didn't seek help. We suffered in silence. We find ways to muscle through it. Sometimes people found what they thought could be the answer in the bottom of a bottle. This is why substance abuse goes hand in hand often with depression, because people self-medicate, because it numbs them for the moment. It makes the pain go away. But what most people don't realize is that alcohol is actually a natural depressant. So you may feel okay while the buzz is up here, but as you begin to sober up, the depressive states come in. And believe it or not, the depressive state can last several days after you stop drinking if you're not doing it daily. If you are doing daily, then you probably never, ever get to really experience the depression until you sober up. And it becomes far more intense the more frequent that you choose to self-medicate. So, how many times have you really been down but was afraid to ask for help and you just kept sweeping the issue under the rug? What people don't understand about not addressing mental health issues is that eventually what you sweep on the rug becomes very visible to you and everyone else. It's a big heaping pile. And by that point, you are, as people like to say, a hot mess. You may be acting out, arguing, missing work, just all kinds of things. Your life is ultimately falling apart because opposed to being honest enough to say the struggle is real right now and I need to get help, I need to reach out to help for somebody. And if you're afraid to ask someone around you for help, then go seek help with someone and a therapist, counselor who does not know you. So then they can help you work through your issues and find a way to create that support network you feel you don't have that you might have. 2, how many times have you watched someone in your life struggle and you know they weren't okay, but you didn't bother to ask? Do you know how many times I have heard, and it legitimately breaks my heart when I hear people say that someone attempts suicide or they actually commit suicide, and all of a sudden people around them will start reflecting on, I felt like something was wrong, but I didn't say something. Or, they came from me and kind of tried to talk about something, but I was too busy. 2020 is hindsight, legitimately. If you see someone has had a change in behavior, something is not okay, please reach out to them and say, are you okay? I've actually asked that to a stranger one day. I was walking someplace, I saw a person sitting down and they looked like they were just about to fall to pieces. And I walked by and I came back. Now, mind you, this is a stranger. And I just said, I know I don't know you, but I just walked by and you seem like you're not okay. Is everything okay? Do you need somebody to talk to? And the woman looked at me like for a second, like kind of blankly. And then she just started crying. And I sat down. I said, I'm here if you want to just talk. I said, or I can just sit here. And she sat there for a couple minutes and then she just started talking and talking and talking. And I said, you know something? I'm glad I stopped. Have you ever thought about seeing a counselor or a therapist? And she's like, no. I said, okay, well, I'm a therapist. I said, I'd recommend it just because you need someone to talk to and you don't feel like you're ready to reach out and to share with people kind of what's going on with you. I said, so how about you consider it to kind of help you navigate this situation until you can maybe get to a place where you feel like you can really talk to people. I don't know what she did moving forward, but before I left, she just said to me, thank you so much. She goes, you're an absolute stranger. And I could share that with you, but I have so many people in my life that are I feel like should be my support, but I feel like it's a burden to talk to them. Never feel you're a burden, because most people who feel that way, often people who commit suicide, feel it's a burden to share how they're feeling when they don't realize that, no, you're not a burden. People want to be there. But if you see someone in distress, don't be afraid to reach out a helping hand, because you never know. You might just be that person. Monica Savage, that's my thought. You might be the person who saves that person's life, maybe that day. You never know that you could have changed one life at a time. And that's all that really matters, saving one life at a time. So we know when we struggle, we have to be willing to be honest enough with ourselves, because this is where it really starts. Honest enough with ourselves to know that we need help, and stop behaving as if we're infallible or unbreakable and we can navigate every situation. Because when you do that, all you're doing is creating compounding issues that when you do break down, it'll be far worse than what it should have been if you just would have addressed the issue. We'll talk about that on the back end of the show. This is episode 63. Let's talk about mental wellness and mental health. Let's take a break, reflect on some of the things we talked about. I always say, let it marinate, let it sit. And when we come back, let's talk about, who might be at higher risk of having mental health issues and how we can begin to practice mental wellness and mental health checkups to help balance out your mental ecosystem. Remember, I talked about, it's an ecosystem: mental wellness, mental health, mental illness. This is an ecosystem. And when you strike a balance, you see wellness and a mind state and mental health that's good. When that balance is off, this is when mental illness can come into play. So let's take a quick break, and we come back, we'll dive into that conversation. You're tuned into M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, episode 63. Let's talk about mental wellness and health.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
Family, friends, community, we need to help each other. Did you know that 1 in 5 people in the U.S. has a diagnosable mental health condition? That's nearly every family in America. This affects us all, including our Latino community. Friends, family, and neighbors may be suffering emotionally and not recognize the signs or know how to ask for help. It's time we pay better attention to our emotional well-being.
Disculpen?
This is how we keep our families and our community healthy and strong. Learn the 5 signs of suffering: personality change, agitation, withdrawal, poor self-care, and hopelessness. Then reach out, connect, show compassion, and offer to help.
¿Está bien?
Know the 5 signs. You just might help someone you love. Visit changedirection.org.
You may not realize it, but these words, often used to describe someone with a mental health condition, can be very harmful. In a country where 1 in 5 people are affected by a mental health condition, it's time for all of us to step up and change the conversation. Just because someone's struggle isn't obvious on the outside doesn't mean they aren't hurting on the inside. We need to see the person, not the condition. Join with me, pledge to be stigma-free.
Hi, this is Kelly.
And this is Jenna.
We're the hosts of ODFM.
That's one from murder.
Each week, we discuss a true crime murder case
and intertwine our unique sense of dark humor.
Each episode relates to a word starting with the letter D.
The stories we tell are serious and true. Our opinions are not.
But be warned, we don't hold back on the details of the case.
Or our inappropriate comments and colorful language.
Join us every Monday on your favorite podcast provider for a new episode of ODFM.
We're on a full ride scholarship to hell.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
All right. Welcome back to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 63. Let's talk about mental wellness and health. Synonymous yet different, but intertwined. And understanding what the balance you strike with wellness equates into what mental health looks like. And when there's a deficiency, it turns into mental health issues, or as we like to call it, illness. It's fair to call it illness, but I do believe language can help us to embrace the conversation better. So I like to say, I'm having an issue, opposed to this is an illness. Make it a little bit easier to deal with. So we know for sure there's risk factors, even with medical conditions, whether it be diabetes, heart disease, cancer. We do know that there can be risk factors that make certain demographics or populations more susceptible to have issues with those health concerns. Mental health is not exactly any different. We do know for a fact that there are genetic factors as well as environmental and biological factors that can play into, for instance, someone being bipolar. We do know that schizophrenia, that there definitely is genetics. We do know that environmental factors can be the things that prompts schizophrenia, so to speak. So we do know that there's that lays the foundation, but we've also begun, as we do work to try to do outreach and give resources and create services and to be able to find the people that need the help that maybe is not getting it, is we do realize that there are certain populations, demographics that are higher at risk. So when we talk about that, beyond talking about the genetics, environmental, and biological, things that play into it, we all know that living conditions and quality of life play into, obviously, mental wellness specifically, that then can become mental health issues because it affects your mind state, so to speak, and hence goes the imbalance. But what we have found down the line is that, for instance, individuals that have long-term medical conditions are more likely to also experience mental health issues. We do know, for instance, that when people have cancer, that, when people maybe have reoccurring things like something is like, it's not simple, but I'll give an example, like back issues. We know that there's mental illness connected to obesity. So we do know that when there's long-term standing medical conditions, that often mental health issues will accompany that. We also have identified that individuals with mental illness are twice as likely to have substance abuse problems. So we do know when we look to the substance abuse community, and we talk about doing addiction counseling. I'm also a certified addiction drug and counselor addiction as well. But one of the things we realize is that we're probably dealing with comorbid issues. So where there is alcohol or whatever type of substance that's being abused, we do know there tends to be an underlying mental health issue. Now, some people might say, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's interesting because everyone that maybe has a substance abuse issue did not always start with a mental health issue. It might have been when this substance abuse issue took hold of their life and they couldn't get it back. is when the mental health issues began to evolve. And then they get into what we like to say is dual diagnosing. So we treat both at the same time, because to me, you can't treat one without the other. And most people who have really done the work, especially with going through addiction, they will tell you that it's impossible to address one without the other, because if you're abusing, you're struggling with depression, you're at a low point in your life, and that low point is where the mental health issues enter into the conversation. We also know that there's a strong correlation between homelessness and mental health issues. In fact, there was a number, like I said, back in 2018 when the study was done, that 86% of people who are homeless have a mental health issue. This is something that, especially if you happen to be a resident of Illinois, that if you remember in the late 70s and 80s, there became a time when many mental health facilities were closed in the state of Illinois. For those who are in my age demographic, as older adults, you remember the likes of Mantino. There became Tinley Park. These were all residential, as moving away from the idea of asylums, but institutions, but they were long-term care mental health facilities. They began to close in the late 70s and 80s. Many of those people had nowhere to go except to the streets, and they were released to the streets. And that began where we saw homelessness really having a spike with mental health issues within Illinois. But we do know often when people have severe mental health issues, their ability to function is greatly impacted, which means they can't keep a job, which often means they can't keep a roof over their head, they can't pay bills, and that ultimately, if they don't have a support system or network in place, that usually results in homelessness. So that's something that we know there's a very high correlation between homelessness and mental health issues. There is a rising concern with children and adolescents due to a myriad of issues, that can be coming, or the origin may be homeschool or both. We're seeing a 20% rise, and each year that number is getting larger. 1 in 5, we talked about 1 in 5 adults. Now we're talking about 1 in 5 youth will need a mental health service. And then think about it. I said by the time of age 40, almost everyone has experienced a mental health issue, 1 in 2. So the thing about mental health issues is it's impacted by many things. All mental health issues, let's say when the mental health and balance is not struck, it can be that way from many, many reasons. It may be from grief. And grief is something that doesn't just encompass the conversation about death. It's also about loss of a job, loss of a relationship. We grieve things. Grief is about loss. So it isn't just purely about death, as most people make the association. It can be just a loss of something that had great importance to someone. So at those times, a person may be struck with depression. Anxiety can come along at different points. Let's say a person is in an automobile accident and they develop anxiety from it. We do see greater incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, having a traumatic event that happened at some point in someone's life that, they at times struggle to resolve. So the interesting thing about mental health issues is that, yes, for some people, it is sustaining and ongoing, and for others, it is not. This is why I always say to people that mental health is not one size fits all. You're unique in what your needs may be, and thus that means you should seek treatment accordingly. You don't have to fall under stigmas or recommendations or labels unless someone who is giving it to you has sat down, taken the time to know your story, your narrative, to understand where the origin of it is. Because with everything, there is an origin, and getting to it sometimes is the hard part. I always tell people, even with medication, there is no easy answer, even though there's genetic testing, which I always hope that people can have, that can then tell a prescribing provider what would be the best medication for you, opposed to let's play the medication roulette wheel. And I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just truthful, because it's not one size fits all. So just because someone took Prozac doesn't mean that Prozac will work for you. So this is why genetic testing can take the guesswork out, because what it ultimately does is tells a provider, this person is going to be better on an SSRI, which is a type of medication that works with the serotonin levels in your brain in uptake. whereas this other person may be better with M.A.Y. That's what genetic testing does. It allows your provider to really get a good idea of what medication is best for you and hence make better choices in prescribing for you. Medications may be short term. Sometimes they may have to be long term, depending on the nature of your situation. If you are clinically depressed, it means you have a chemical imbalance that isn't just driven by a situation. You may be a person that may have to take medication long term. Or if your situation is driven, your depression or anxiety is driven by a situation, perhaps addressing and dealing with the situation may resolve the fact that you don't have to be on medication at all or long term. This is why I'm saying it again, mental health is not one size fits all, and it should not be treated as such. It is as unique as any other type of diagnosable illness that requires individual approach, though best practices will be used in treatment, which means, yes, we do understand what works good for depression or anxiety or PTSD, or if you have a eating disorder, there are things that are, by best practice and research that have shown to be effective. Which of that might be effective for you or someone you love is where the work comes in. So, how can we begin to normalize mental health conversations? Well, the first thing I will tell you is we have to stop stigmatizing mental health. We don't stigmatize cancer. Matter of fact, we go at cancer aggressively as we should. We're going to kick cancer's ass. Well, I'm trying to figure out when it comes to mental health, everybody steps back and they want to stigmatize it and not want to address it the same way you would diabetes or heart disease or cancer or whatever the other medical condition that's far more easily to accept. But yet when it comes to your mind, the driver of that vehicle of you, everybody wants to stigmatize it and make it a bad thing. There's an equation to stigmatizing. And I think this is important and I wanted to share it because I felt that people really needed to understand what it looks like and how it breaks down. To end stigma, you have to understand what goes into stigma. There are 3 components, which I call the stigma equation. Prejudice is the first part. It's the negative attitude towards mental health, towards mental illness. Mental health is okay as long as you're happy, you're good, and not having a struggle. But when it turns into a mental health issue, aka an illness, then that's when people get negative attitudes. Oh, you're bipolar. First of all, people are not bipolar. They have bipolar disorder. People suffer from depression. They are not depression. People suffer from anxiety. They are not anxiety. The dangerous thing about stigmatizing mental health issues is that sometimes people then internalize it, which is on the back end. So negative attitudes about mental health issues, aka illness, is where it starts. Then it becomes discriminatory. It goes from attitude, goes into action. Negative responses. That's the labels I just talked about. Oh, she's bipolar. Oh, she's doing that because she's bipolar, or she's this, or that depressed. Oh, you always act out because of this. It's your mental illness why you're behaving this way. So then we start having negative responses to the individual. So you take prejudice plus discrimination, which is all wrapped in negativity. That then makes a person stigmatized, makes them feel unwanted, it makes them feel shamed. Now ask yourself a question. With that type of equation in play, if this is what the overarching conversation is with mental health, is there anybody confused why we can't move forward in addressing it? This should shed light into when people do things that we think are egregious. So like I just talked about, I'm glad I can finally talk about, what happened in Buffalo, New York, and even in Texas without getting a little kind of teary, because for a while I get choked up just thinking about the loss of life. These are people we have now already known to be identified to have mental health issues. Some were not addressed, others were, whatever the case may be. But the feeling of unwanted and shame is why people go down a path and do self-destructive things. It ultimately turns into, if you think about it, I want to reflect my pain on you. I want you to feel the hurt that I feel. When people get to a point when they can extinguish others' lives, there's no rational reason, there's no empathy. They want you to feel what they feel. And this is where we've gotten to in our country. And yet we're still refusing to respond to mental health issues appropriately. Instead, we want to focus on gun control. Don't get me wrong. I get the conversation about gun control, but I'm going to stand firm on this. And you can say, oh, that's wrong. Okay, this is how I feel. It's called opinions. 1, a gun can't fire itself. It takes a working mind and a trigger finger to pull it. So the issue is not so much the weapon as much as the person is really the weapon. The gun is merely a tool to do their destruction. And most people who do destruction to that level is broken, because people who are whole don't attempt to extinguish others' lives. Think about that. So if you ever wanted to really start a conversation about mental health and mental health issues, I'm not sure how many more innocent lives have to be taken before we realize it's a conversation that is well long overdue. People, it is tardy. I can't even tell you how to describe how this conversation needs to be put on the table about what's wrong with it, but how we can begin to make changes and how we can help fix broken people. Now, I'll be honest, you can't fix everybody. That would be a utopia. But we have to do better in addressing when there are issues in front of us. I don't have children. I didn't have children, but I look at parents all the time and I say, if you are a parent in this world, you should be mortified. You should be mortified to think that your kid could go to school one day and not return home because some broken person decided that they wanted to share their pain with others. And I'm going to say this, I have more than can put on 2 hands, have dealt with adolescents that have had not just suicidal thoughts, but homicidal thoughts, and have had access to the method. So I feel we have to change our trajectory with schools. We have to do better. We have to put things in place. And I'm going to say this, school districts are overwhelmed with kids with behavioral issues, not just this. School districts are overwhelmed. We have to sink tools and resources where they are needed to protect our children. We are their protectors. And when we fail them, we can see the consequences, not just becoming broken adults in some cases, but when lives become extinguished because we failed to protect the children. So we have to do better with mental wellness. Schools need more resources. They need more counselors. We need mental health in the schools. We have to extend the resources. And I'm going to tell you people something. Let me just say, bullying is not addressed in schools the way that it should, because they will tell you they are non-tolerant. And I've talked to too many parents whose children are being bullied and nothing is really being done. So if you work in that field, you probably know what I'm talking about. And I'll be honest, this is not easy. But if you say you are zero tolerance, be about it. Don't just say it. Be about it. Because bullying is where so much of this goes. And while we're seeing some of the recent perpetrators were 18, fresh out of high school, and angry already at the world for different reasons. So I was going to say this. The risk factors are there, and the risk factors are rising with our youth population. And we have to get better about not just talking about mental health, but doing something about it. And we have to stop stigmatizing it. Remember the equation I talked about. It starts with prejudice, which is the attitude. Discrimination is the action, the bullying, the minimizing people, making people feel unwanted. And then it turns into the stigma. That person then feeling unwanted, shameful, and not wanting to address their issues often, but often wanting to give pain to others, and it turns ugly when it does. We have to stop stigmatizing it, and we have to start talking about it, normalizing it, because it's just like everything else. So when we talk about opening up our toolbox, what do you take from this episode? I want you to start focusing on mental wellness daily. Be aware. Do your checkup from the neck up. Reflect on your day. First of all, when you do your checkup from the neck up, what that ultimately means is, here's what I want you to start paying attention to with yourself, your loved ones, or maybe other people within your circle, your support system. Heck, you might even see it from a stranger. Some of this. If you find there's been changes subtly that have become more consistent, it goes from being rare to frequent to constant. This is when you know things up here aren't okay. If you see changes in how your appetite is, how your sleep patterns, too much or too little, ask yourself why. If you find you are pulling away from others, we call that social isolation. You just don't want to be around people. You just want to be to yourself. You're no longer reaching out to people, not taking phone calls, just not doing the things you were doing before. That's a red flag, especially if you stop doing the activities that you love. We call that anhedonia. Like the things that really interest you, you were passionate about, just no longer seem to be there anymore. You feel fatigue, low energy. You just don't have energy to do stuff. Maybe you're feeling numb, like nothing really matters. Like it doesn't matter what I do. And this kind of plays into hopelessness and helplessness. It doesn't matter what I'm going to do. Nothing's going to change. It's just going to be the same. That negative thinking. You know, do you feel achy and painful all the time? Do you find you're looking for solutions to your problems in a way that aren't healthy, consistently smoking, drinking, using other drugs more than you should? You might be a social drinker, but all of a sudden, if you find you're drinking more at home or you're drinking more than you normally would drink, ask yourself a question: why am I doing this? What am I not addressing? Do you find that sometimes you get forgetful or confused, you get edgy, you're more angry, upset, worried, scared, and this is not normally who you are? Ask yourself why. Do you find yourself, your trigger is short, your fuse gets, it goes off faster, you find yourself yelling or fighting with family and friends, like everything just makes you angry? Do you feel like you're experiencing severe mood swings? 1 minute you're okay, the next minute you're tearful. And this is ultimately causing problems in your relationship. Do you find that you're consistently maybe ruminating about something negative, a memory? Something triggers and all of a sudden a memory comes back that you didn't know. And all of a sudden you can't let it go. You're racing thoughts when you go to sleep. You can't turn your mind off. You toss and you turn. And by the time you do fall asleep, it's time to get up and start your day again. Well, guess what? Your brain didn't get to rest. It didn't get to reset. And now that anxiety that you felt, that may not be like an anxiousness, like your heart racing, but that inability to be able to shut down and to reboot for the next day didn't happen. If you get to the point where you have things like you're hearing voices, saying things that aren't there, or you start to believe things, and this is often hard for people to point. When the psychosis piece pops into mental illness, this is something most people aren't able to really pinpoint because to them it may feel real. So if all of a sudden you're hearing voices, now be able to distinguish between you having an internal conversation, because I'm big on self-talk. You. If you feel like you're hearing somebody else's voice, that's different. And if that happens, you should tell somebody. And I know that's embarrassing for people. Like, I don't know why, but I think I'm hearing voices. That deserves to be looked into. Because here's the thing about mental illness. It can be prompted from other things, especially psychosis. Psychosis can actually have medical backgrounds. It could be things, a thyroid could be off, can create psychosis, low sodium, potassium. In older individuals, if they have a urinary tract infection, it can create psychosis. So that doesn't mean there's something wrong. There could be something underlying from a medical side that could be prompting any of these things. But unless you address it, and a lot of times people will start with, if you're having these issues, they'll start with their primary care physician. And by now, you probably know most of your primary care physicians or your family doctors, they're doing screening for depression even when you didn't ask for it. It's the PH16 questionnaire. And if you answer in a certain way, they may send you to your local emergency room because they feel like something's going on with you and they're not okay. Or they may make a referral recommendation. You see a mental health provider. So even within general medical practice now, we even screen for depression and everything else when you come into the ER, because we understand that mental health and mental health issues is on the front burner. So we as professionals do not attempt to ignore it. But something else to be mindful of, especially you may not pinpoint this one. All of a sudden you feel like everyone's against you. People are talking about you. Everything kind of has taken a twist. If you notice you're with somebody and it seems like they're acting paranoid or everyone's against me and it just doesn't make sense, like how they're explaining something to you, there might be something else going on. And you may have to have a conversation with them, especially if it's not their personality to be that way. These are some things when you're doing the checkup from the neck up, you want to be mindful of. But let's talk about working on mental wellness, creating that balance for our mental wellness, to have a balanced mental state, our mental health, our mental state, to strike that balance in your mental ecosystem. Remember, that's your mental wellness with your mental health, which is your mental state. And when it's in balance, part of your ecosystem, mental illness or mental health issues can be introduced. So let's talk about 5 different things that I want you to think about and to work on. 1, If any of these things are happening above, you can start with seeking out professional help. Like I said, if it's easier to start out with your primary care physician because that's someone you feel comfortable with, then start with that. Let them help you to begin to process and to really evaluate some of the things that you're struggling with. I'll be honest, about 5 or 6 of the things that I just described to you can be a result of actual menopause. I'm not being funny. I can tell you personally. So depression can be and mood swings and just lack of focus. All these things and actually can be part of menopause as well, and people don't realize this. This is why I'm not saying you may not actually have a mental health issue. Your body is just sending you some subtle signs like, hey, excuse me, we're not okay. Don't ignore it. Start with your primary, care physician, family doctor, help you to evaluate it, and then proceed from there. So get professional help. Connect with others. Maybe before you decide to go talk to your family doctor or practitioner, you may say, you have that support system that you feel like that's that person you got in your corner that you can bounce stuff off of and be like, people do it to me all the time. And I appreciate it. Like, hey, sis, I gotta talk to you about something. I've been dealing with this. And what do you think? And I know they're asking me as a friend, but I also feel like they're also asking me for my professional opinion. I'm like, I'm not here to diagnose you, but what you expressed to me sounds like something that needs to be explored. And I always ask people, when's the last time you actually had a full, physical where you got lab work totally checked out? I do it annually. I encourage everybody, especially when you hit the big 4-0, and I'm way past that. You should really commit to that for breast cancer screening, prostate, but even in your 30s, you should be doing regular checkups just to make sure that you're okay, having your thyroid checked, especially if you know there's a family history of, let's say, heart disease or cancer, diabetes. Get ahead of it. Don't be behind it. So I always say, when's the last time you actually had a full checkup just to see where you were at physically, to see if any of these things are manifesting, and or unless they're telling me they got some stuff going on in their life that's creating the issue, then we realize there's something else going on. So connect with others, bounce off what you're feeling to get some insight, because this is where your support network comes in. 3, stay positive and keep positive people around you. Avoid toxicity. I'm going to tell you something. Often people feel they have to keep toxic people in their life simply because they're related to you. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. If it's toxic, would you go drink bleach? No. So why would you keep a person who's like toxic in your life that does you harm just because you're related? You have to be mindful. You want to keep positive people around you so that you can continue to be positive. And it's easy that when you allow yourself to fall into negativity, that's like a slippery slope that leads to a rabbit hole. So you got to constantly keep positivity in front of you. Next, 4, physically take care of yourself, exercise, get good sleep. Try to get that 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Be mindful of your diet. If you're eating, remember, this is the temple. And I'm mindful of this. It's easy to eat wrong. But, if you don't have a healthy diet, it might be lending to maybe you're not getting the proper nutrients that you need. So you could be low potassium. People often are iron deficient. Are you eating to be healthy so that you're feeding your mind and you're feeding your body? That's a basic place to start right there. Like, what is your lifestyle like? Are you leading a healthy lifestyle physically and mentally? And lastly, 5, develop coping skills and be open to change. We have to change our mindset about when change happens, people instantly think it's bad. Change is just a change in trajectory of something. And being able to cope or to adapt is important. People who want to dig their heels and fight change, especially when it's not going to help them, is nothing short of creating an issue for yourself and often creating stress and anxiety that you don't need. If you can't change the outcome of something, if it's out of your control and you've done the most you can, then the next thing is you have to be able to bring your coping skills out and learn how to adapt. I know. Easier said than done. So these are just things I want you to keep in mind as you work on striking that balance. These are things that you can put into your toolbox. So we always have an episode takeaway. And here's what I would tell you is this. Mental health and wellness requires focus and effort, as does anything of value to maintain. Choose to put conflict and issues into perspective, because all they're going to do is lead to greater stress and more problems down the road. Address things as they are in front of you in the moment. Do not decide to try to push them on the back burner unless you have to, because you don't have the time at that moment. But if you are deferring an issue to address an issue because you just don't want to deal with it, all you're doing is creating greater problems for yourself down the line. Your mental health is one of your most important assets. When you are mentally grounded, you can function in all areas of your life with efficiency and feel accomplished, purposeful, and happy. And when you are that person, people see it when you go to work. Your friends can see it. Your relationships benefit from it. You just feel in sync. But when you're mentally unbalanced, you feel like you are disjointed. So as you would give care to the rest of your body, give some love to what's above the neck as well, because it is the driver of the vehicle of you. Whether you want to accept it or not, folks, these are facts. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambitions, harness that motivation to help you acquire the success and satisfaction you seek in your life, your everyday life. We're talking small goals, long-term goals, the whole 9 yards. Remember, you can always find episodes, can be found on Apple, Google Podcasts, iTunes platforms, iHeartRadio. You can find it in so many different places. But remember, probably the easiest way to find it is MA.com. But if you're going to go to your podcast platform of choice, just make sure you put in M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, because a whole lot of Maya might pop up if you put it in there. But you will find me. But like I said, just go to my website and you can make things a little bit easier, or as well as you can go to my YouTube channel, M.A.Y.A, and listen to episodes, watch them as well there. So, you know, I always end every episode with the saying that people sometimes always wonder why I say it. And I have to admit, I stole the line from a recent song from Pearl Jam, because when I was listening to the song, it's called Dances with Something. It really stuck with me for some reason. He said it, and I just kind of felt like, wow, this is something that really has value to it. And I like it. And I feel like it's worthy of sharing with people. So I end every episode with saying, remember, your present becomes your past, and your future is no more. So make the most of every single day. Everybody, be well, stay safe. But more importantly, even if you don't believe it and you don't buy into it, be absolutely amazing. I will see you next week. Maya is going to stay on point and on task for episode 64. I have no idea what it's going to be. So join me and you'll find out what it happens then, everybody. Until next time, be purposeful in your actions. Ciao.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.